Mike Radich here, and I'm now joined on the phone by MMA veteran Chuck O'Neil. Chuck, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Chuck, you got a fight coming up March 14th at CES MMA 22. How's training been going for the fight?
It's been going great. You know, I got a good mix up of training partners, and I got my head coach Nate Ryan out of Mass BJJ, kind of orchestrates everything and puts the game plan together and gets me ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Your team, Mass BJJ, is that an MMA school or is that just a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school? And if so, where do you do your MMA training at? Is there any other gym you cross-train at? Could you explain what you do there?
Yeah. So I'm at Mass BJJ 3 days a week, and Nate Ryan is my head coach. You know, he does more than just jiu-jitsu. He's got stand-up technique and MMA game and everything too. That's just the name of the school, is Massachusetts Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but there's also kickboxing and MMA in place. I also cross-train at Bishop's Boxing in West Bridgewater, and I hook up a lot with Tom Egan up in Southie at Peter Welsh's gym in South Boston. So make my way around and get some good sparring in around, and a lot of the technical works with Nate at Mass BJJ.
Mm-hmm. At Mass BJJ, are you an instructor or are you just a fighter there?
No, I'm just a fighter and train out of there. So, my coach doesn't want me to really focus on teaching classes or training anybody on that aspect, and just wants me to focus on my fight career. So.
Oh, I see. Now, on March 14th, you're going to be taking on Roger Carroll. What are your thoughts about him as an opponent?
I think he's a super tough guy. You know, any film I've watched, he's really tough to put away. Any of the fights that he's lost, he's won 11 out of his 13 fights by submission. He's got a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and from all accords I hear, he's got a black belt in judo as well. So he's definitely going to be looking to put me on the ground, and that's nothing, that's going to be new to me. A lot of guys try to take me down, put me down. But I train out of primarily a jiu-jitsu school, so I'll be ready for it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Roger Carroll's nickname is the Leprechaun. With you being Irish and everything, will it be hard for you to punch a leprechaun in the face?
Oh, man, one of my best friends is Tom Egan, and he's one of my main training partners as well, and he's directly from Ireland.
Oh.
He's going to be on that card as well, and I tell you, some of the training sessions and sparring rounds we have, people sit there and they watch, and they're like, man, I wish we could pay to watch this. So, no, it won't be difficult, because if I can punch one of my best friends in the face and get hit by one of my best friends who's Irish, I think I'll have no problem doing it for money. So,
Definitely. Now, where do you feel that you have the advantage in this fight? Obviously, you said that he's going to try to take it to the ground. Stand-up wise, is that where you think you have the advantage, or is there another area in the game where you think you're better than him?
I think when it just comes to MMA overall, I think I'm just going to have the slight advantage on him, and I'm not talking down to him. I think he's a very good opponent and everything, and I train really hard in all facets of the game, and I feel like I'm a really well-rounded MMA fighter, and I'm not just one of those one-dimensional guys. So anywhere he looks to try to put the fight, I feel like I'm going to put him in trouble, and eventually not force, but find my way to a finish.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You hit the nail right on the head. You said you're a very well-rounded guy, and I believe that's true. But where do you think you're better? Do you think you're better standing or on the ground?
I have my days.
Right.
Days I feel like my stand-up's the best, and I've really evolved since getting with Mass BJJ back in 2011. I feel like my jiu-jitsu game has really flourished, and I feel leaps and bounds way better than I ever have. I've been in this game since 2005, and I wish I was with them from the start. And I've just learned so much, and just gotten so much better at top pressure, and my bottom game's gotten better, and my wrestling's gotten better, just everything in general. So, like I said, anywhere the fight goes, I feel like I feel comfortable in, and Nate puts me in that right place to be comfortable in any spot the fight goes.
Mm-hmm. Now, Roger Carroll, if I'm not mistaken, he's normally a lightweight. He usually fights at 155. You could probably never make 155. You're a pretty good size welterweight. So how much will size be an advantage for you?
Yeah, I'm not really worried about it. He's fought at 85. He's fought at 70. And, I guess his last fight was at 55. I'm not going to really sleep on that or, look at that to be an advantage, as far as weight cuts go and everything like that. I know I'm a really big 170, and there's no way in hell I'd ever make 155 unless I cut one of my legs off.
Right.
So, normally I'm walking around 205 or so, and that's not, a bad 205 weight. So, it's a drastic cut for me. I know I'll be upwards around 200 pounds when I get in the cage, and I just worry about myself. I don't really worry about them or their size. Me making sure I'm healthy and feeling good.
Right. Right. Now, do you have a contract with CES, or do you just have a good relationship with them where you just do single bout agreements?
Yeah, it's just a single bout agreement. I have a good relationship with them, with the Birchfields, who are the owners of CES, and, Pat Sullivan, who's the matchmaker, and, between them and my management, everything goes pretty smoothly. They do a good job of trying to match me up and making sure everything goes smoothly. And, it's good because I get to fight an hour from where I live. I get to sleep in my own bed the night before. I get a lot of family and friends that get to go to the fights, which wasn't the case for a little while. So, hey, if they keep getting me fights, it works out for me as I try to make it back to a bigger promotion.
Mm-hmm. This will be your fourth fight in your last 5 fights where you fought in Rhode Island. How do you like fighting there?
No, like I said, it's great because, the number one thing is the comfort. And, I get to sleep in my own bed. I go home, I have all my meals prepped, and, after I weigh in and everything. So it's not too far of a drive that I have to stay there. I get to go home. I get to have the comfort of my own place and eat all my food and recover, instead of doing it all in a hotel room, eating out of a cooler and, searching around trying to get this clean food. I get to make it all myself. So it's very beneficial. And like I said, to have all of my family there, not just the ones who can happen to make a fight, whether it was in Indiana or Miami or Vegas, it's really refreshing to look out there after my fights and see my family right there in the crowd and all my close friends. So. Mm-hmm.
So what kind of crowd should we be expecting on the 14th for you to have there? You mentioned family, but
it's usually a good crowd. I seem to have a lot of people that like to back me. I'm not one of those guys who likes to talk a lot of crap. I just like to go out there and show what I can do in the cage and let my actions speak for myself. And I'm definitely going out there to make it as brutal as possible and get out as quick as possible and get my hand raised. So it should be a pretty exciting crowd. Like I said, Tom Egan's on the card as well with me, and he always comes to fight, and he's going to have a real good matchup. And with us fighting back to back on the same card now for 3 straight times, we always put on a good show. So definitely expect an exciting crowd.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, I was looking at your record, and the one thing I've noticed about your record is you haven't been able to put together more than a 2 or 3 fight win streak at a time. Just curious, why is that? I'm sure you've thought about it. What have you come back with? When you think about why you haven't been able to 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row, what's prevented you from doing that?
It is tough. It's a tough situation. Coming off the Ultimate Fighter, losing the finale and, getting that huge win over Marcus Davis, it took a long time for us to get a fight. And, then we finally got a fight out in Indiana, and it was a questionable decision. It could have been a hometown decision or whatever you want to call it. But, we dropped that decision, and it's kind of go back to the drawing board. And there were still holes in the game. So, that's on me. And we string together 2 straight wins and then take another tough fight, on 4 weeks' notice. It wasn't too long of a camp or anything like that, and it's nothing that went wrong in training camp at all. It was me against a guy who was really tough, Brazilian guy. We both came out, we tried to kill each other, and I made a slight mistake, and again, that's on me. It's a tough sport, we're not playing basketball here. We're going out there trying to rip each other's heads off, and the small miscalculations in front of everyone makes you look like you're the worst person in the world that night. But it's how you bounce back from that and how you make those corrections and come back and perform the next time you fight. That shows the kind of fighter you are, the kind of man you are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, on the flip side to that, you haven't suffered a losing streak. You've never suffered back-to-back losses. Just curious, how have you been able to avoid that?
My desire to win. I'm a grinder. I like to get in the gym and work out harder, and it fuels me. Like I said, after that last fight that I had lost back in August, I got back in the gym and just hit the weights hard. Got a little bit bigger than I was before and a little bit more explosive, and worked on some of the things that I got caught up with in the cage. Instead of getting caught in the pissing contest when I'm trapped in a corner, is to move out. Use more head movement and everything. Not get solidified in those pissing contests. Go for more of a takedown situation. And we went out. We had a really, really good fight in November. We got the finish, a real bloody fight against a guy with a good record. He's 12-4. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So, we definitely made good use of the time and filled in the gaps, made those corrections. And I'm not one of those guys who just fights for the sake of fighting. I don't fight because I have to. I fight because I love it. So if I'm going to do it with passion, I'm going to do it right. Just, like I said, always trying to fill in those gaps and make myself as better, as possible every time I go out there and fight.
Are you a full-time fighter, or do you have a second job?
I also work as well. I went to school. I got my degree in exercise science. I'm a personal trainer. independent contractor. I have a gym in Raynham, Mass, which is close to my home in Bridgewater, Mass. I train 26 to 27 clients a week, and still train full-time with my fighting and everything, and, lift and sprint and all that stuff. So I'm really good with time management. My social life isn't too great. I don't get to see my family and friends too often, but the little downtime I do have, I make sure I see the people that matter most to me. So it's all about doing what makes you happy at the end of the day, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm going to look back in my life and, 10, 15, 20 years down the line and have no regrets because I'm doing what I love to do.
Mm-hmm. One of the criticisms I see of you, and if you haven't heard this, please tell me, but people say that you win fights that you're not supposed to win, and you lose fights that you're supposed to win. The Marcus Davis fight is probably the one that people bring up all the time because at the time he was on a 3-fight win streak, and he's a very tough guy. He's been around the sport for a very long time. A lot of people thought that he was going to come in there and continue the ball rolling and pick up win number 4, but you were able to stop that and win a decision over him. And then there's other fights where people go, this is a fight where you should win, and then you end up losing. Is this a criticism you've heard before, and is there any stock that you take in that?
No, I've definitely heard it all, and you hit the nail on the head with the Marcus Davis fight. I think me and my corners were the only people in that whole arena, and anyone watching on the stream that they had, that thought I was actually going to win. Like, I didn't go into that fight thinking I was going to lose, and they brought me in to lose. And,
right. Mm-hmm.
I've been accredited as partial the reason that promotion's gone under, because they paid Marcus X amount and had to pay me both ends. So, but like I said, the fight after that, I was supposed to go out there and win that fight out in Indiana. I was expected to win that, and there was little rumblings if I won that fight, I was going to go back to the UFC and all this stuff. And, I went out and I didn't have a great performance. I feel like I did enough to win, but again, you can't change that. And I didn't fight to the best of my ability. And I don't know. It's one of those things. There's all this preparation and everything, and you go in to one night. It all comes down 6, 7, 8 weeks of training down to one night. Some nights you have a bad night of training, and it just sucks if it's that night in the cage. But again, you just got to go back to the drawing board. You can't rest your head on that and think, oh, woe is me. You got to pick yourself up and keep working hard to try to better yourself, or the game's just going to pass you by.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you brought up The Ultimate Fighter, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit. I know it's been a while since you were on that show, but I'm a big fan of that show. I don't know why people give it's getting stale and all this stuff, but I still like that show because there's nothing better than seeing somebody being tested physically, mentally, emotionally, everything. I think it's a great tool to see what a fighter's really made of. So I'm still a fan of the show since day one. I still like the show as much as I did when I first saw it. But anyways, your experience on The Ultimate Fighter was kind of a weird one. Let's go back to the beginning, because you were not picked on the first 32 or first 16. I don't remember if there was a fight to get in the house or not, but you were kind of an alternate. They brought you in after when Miles Jury went down with an injury. Could you explain that time when you went through the tryouts and they said that you weren't going to be a part of the show to when they gave you the call saying, hey, we want you to fill in?
Yeah, it was a really crazy experience. All the producers and everything, I went through the medicals, I made it through, the interview process went well, and it was just really slow. They weren't sure they were going to do 32, 16, and they ended up doing 14 and had the wild card that season, mm-hmm. and they didn't do the fights to get in the house. And, they flew me and Justin Edwards out as the alternates, so they had all them in Palace Station, and Dustin and I were in the Palms, and we're sitting there on standby. We don't know what was going on. And they're like, just be ready. So I'm keeping the weight down, and it was just a miserable experience. And then they called us the next day, and they told both Justin and I, look, everyone's fine. We're going to send you home. And, it's funny because both Justin and I both ended up making the show. So, I went out to Vegas. I was at the Palms. I go home. I'm eating my face off. And then 2 days later, the head producer calls me and says, hey, we're flying you back out. One of the guys blew the knee out. And then, boom, I'm on the show. So it was a pretty wild experience to go cross-country back and forth a couple times over a 3-day period. Drop the weight, gain the weight, drop the weight again. So it was pretty interesting. And then, to make the show and having to cut weight 4 times in a 17-day period, that was like an ultimate test within my mind and my body. So that's why I into the sport, to test myself, and I definitely did over that period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up, because there's been a handful of guys throughout the years of that show that have fought at a higher weight class than the weight class they fight in normally. How crazy was that for you, a guy who fights at 170 normally, having to fight at that again? I mean, it would have made a big difference if you were on the show as a middleweight and then you fight at welterweight normally, but you had to make the weight class that you actually fight in. So what was that like?
absolutely terrible. I mean, I was nowhere near as big as I am now. Back then, when I was on that show, I was walking maybe at 190 and like nowhere near as much mature muscle mass as I have now in my system. But you know, even still back then, every fight I had, I just felt more and more muscle was just dying off my body to the point where I got home and I looked like absolute crap. You know, I was walking around at like 178, and it was just terrible. I felt awful and sluggish, and my posture looked like crap. So I definitely took a beating on that show for sure.
Right. What exactly were you eating during this time? Because, like you mentioned, you had to make weight 4 times to be on that show. So, you know, from and a sidebar to that, how many days in between fights do you have?
The first fight I had, I fought Zach Davis, and you know, he caught me in the triangle.
Right.
And 4 days later, I had to make weight again, and then it was like another 4 days where I had to fight again, and then another like 3 days after that I had to fight again. So it was pretty ridiculous. Something along those lines. But I mean, it ended up coming down to 4 less than 17 days. And you know, I eat very clean anyways. I'm, you know, real big on eating complex carbohydrates, like when you need them around your workouts and stuff. But it was getting down to that real nitty gritty where my carbs in the morning were just turning into fruit, and you know, I really wasn't getting much carbs for the rest of the day. Just a lot of spinach and broccoli and, you know, lean protein sources and stuff. And meanwhile, a lot of the other guys in the house are sitting there and, you know, they're real 155ers.
Right.
And they're eating ice cream and Hot Pockets and, you know, Tostitos and all this crap. I'm like, this is awful. So, you know, it was a real trying time, and but whatever, you know, it was worth it, and I wouldn't take any of it away.
Now, coaching-wise, your coach on that season was Brock Lesnar. Not saying that you would have won the show or anything, but how different would things have been if you were on Team Dos Santos?
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, that, you know, seeing Team Dos Santos, they were coming over, they were having, you know, barbecues at the house. They cared so much more about their team and their fighters, and they brought in special guest coaches, and their practices are so much better. And, you know, our team was just crazy. Like, Brock, like, didn't care. He'd miss practices and cancel practices all the time. If it wasn't for him bringing Marty Morgan, his wrestling coach from Minnesota, in, who was one of his head coaches, like, it would have been a disaster. I mean, it was a free-for-all most days. They're just like, hey, hit mitts with each other. You know, there wasn't much coaching going on. And then Rodrigo Medeiros, Caprito, who was a BJJ, you know, like, world champ black belt, he came in, and I kind of, like, went over to him, and, like, he kind of became my coach on the team. I just kind of drifted over to him and stayed with him as much as I could and just picked his brain on as much as I could while I was there. But, you know, training with Jimmy Quinlan, who was on, you know, Team Sun, and he comes back and has, like, this awesome experience and had awesome training, and I was like, oh, man, that sucks. And then, you know, even Peggy Morgan,
right,
she trains with me as well. You know, she was on Ronda Rousey's team. So,
right,
you know, they both had this, you know, a great experience as far as training goes and coaching. So I felt jealous.
Right, definitely. Now, what kind of words of advice did you give your teammates who were on the show after you? I mean, obviously, your situation and the season that you were on and the coaches you had were a lot different than theirs, and maybe you couldn't relate to that because of how different the seasons were. But what kind of advice did you give those two when they were going into the show?
I just try to tell them, like, have as much fun as possible, and, like, you know, don't try to do anything that's not you. And all three of us have kind of different personalities. Peggy's more like me, and Jimmy's more like a reserved kind of guy, keep to himself. So I knew he was going to be okay, just kind of keep to himself and make his way through it and everything. But, you know, I just kind of laid out the parameters, told him what to expect out of it, like how training goes, how the fights go, you know, how you get like a food list every day, how that works and everything. And, you know, just give him kind of insight of how it was going to be. And like I said, Jimmy's season was a lot more reserved. There was a lot more professionalism going on with all the fighters that was in his house. And, you know, Peggy's season was a little weird because it was the guys and the girls, but she adapts to it a little bit better because she's kind of a goofball like me. So, but as you said, it's kind of different every season with the dynamic of who you have in the house, you know, and who the coaches are and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And piggybacking off that, can you really understand what goes on in the house unless you actually live in there? Because I'm sure you had seen the show, you know, there was 12 or 13 seasons before you were on the show. So can you really understand what's going on if you're not in there?
No, it was completely different than what I expected. I loved it, honestly. At the end of it, the producer said I was probably one of the only people that ever said I didn't want to leave, I didn't want to go home. You're completely isolated from society, and you know, for the first time ever, I wasn't having to worry about bills or, you know, paying anything. And, like, I was getting paid to stay there. So that's essentially income going into my pocket that I didn't have to worry about because I'm not at home spending money. And I'm getting free food. I'm like, hell, this is awesome. You know, you get a little vacation. They take your phone away, no internet, no TV, no garbage stuff. So it was cool. It was a cool experience, and I'm all about life experiences, so I loved it. We're mostly everyone else, when they get to the end, they're like, oh, get me out of here. I want to leave. And, you know, everyone on my season, Jimmy was the same, and Peggy was the same, where they were counting down the days. They couldn't wait to get out of there and get out of the house. But for me, I didn't want to leave. I was like, this is awesome. I would stay for another 6 weeks. But it's different. It's very much so a different experience.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk about the roller coaster ride of emotions you were going through? Because you fought once in the house, lost, and then you were given second life or a second chance because you fought in the wild card and ended up winning that fight. Then the next fight you had, you won that one, and so you know, here you are, you're back in the competition, and you're on a nice little roll here. But then you know, you eventually lost to Tony Ferguson in the semifinals. But talk about the up and down, because you go from a guy who shows up to Vegas not really being on the show, then you fill in for an injury, and then you lose a fight, then you get a second chance, and then you're back in the competition. Can you talk about the roller coaster of emotions you were going through?
Oh, it was crazy. You know, I almost got kind of cocky because I felt like I was doing so well with everybody in the training room, and I was kind of like, well, what the hell? Why wasn't I picked right away? And, you know, to be on the show, and this is silly. And then, you know, I went out into the fight, and I almost underestimated the guy, and then you get caught in the submission. I was bullshit. And I just remember Dana was trying to tell me, oh, good fight. I just remember, like, walking right past him. You know, just thought I screwed my own opportunity up. And, you know, he picked me for the wild card, and I got the chance to come back, and I was real excited, and I was, like, going to take it seriously. I think I was goofing around too much. I kind of let my, like, beard grow out big and was acting real goofy all the time. And it's not like I was trying to act actually goofy. I'm a goofball anyways, but I feel like I was just not focused enough. And then I kind of reeled it back in and just got focused and tried to make the most of my training sessions, you know, whether they were crappy or not. And, you know, win the wild card fight, and was really excited. And then, you know, they come back with the matchup between Zach Davis and I. Right. And, you know, it was, you know, lucky for me, it was a different outcome, getting the win against Zach, which is, you know, big. And it was just great. I was elated. And, you know, then to fight Tony in the semifinals, my body was absolutely trashed.
Right.
I just took an ass beating, and, you know, you got that loss, but it was crazy. You know, it was a crazy experience, and like I said, you know, whether I won or lost or whatever, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a great experience.
Just curious, do you still stay in contact with anybody from the show?
Every now and again, I'll hear from Charlie Rader. I don't hear from him too much. I probably talk to Justin Edwards the most out of anybody. You know, when the show first ended, you'd kind of talk to people here and there when the episodes are coming out. I talk to Shamar every now and again, but other than that, I don't really hear from too many of them. You kind of go your own separate ways. There's some guys that you never hear from at all, and you know, like Len Bentley, I don't think I've ever heard from him since the show ended, and just like Mick Bowman, another guy I never really hear from at all. Like I hear from Clay every now and again, but probably Justin Edwards is the guy that I stay the closest with, and you know, we stay in contact, check in with each other every now and again, just make sure everything's going well, so you know, everything's going. So I would say Justin Edwards is definitely the most readily contacted guy out of the season. The fight at the finale, when you fought against Chris Cope, you ended up losing that fight by decision. What went wrong for you in that fight? Was it more of the, you know, really your body didn't have a time to rest when you're in the house? Like you mentioned, going into the Tony Ferguson fight, you were, you know, pretty drained and pretty beat up because you'd fought so much and had to cut so much weight. Were you feeling effects of the house, in preparation for that fight, or was it just completely unrelated to why you didn't beat Chris Cope? No, I think a little bit. I mean, Chris definitely was a better man. He came out with a game plan, and that's never happened to me before. I never had anyone game plan for me, and here's someone who had watched film on me, who brought people into camp specifically for me. And, like, I remember just talking to him afterwards. I was completely blown away, and he was, like, telling me all the stuff he did in preparation and how he knew tells when I was going to punch and when I was going to try to press him against the cage. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. This is what's supposed to happen. And at the time, I was like, in between gyms, I really didn't have a head coach. Jimmy Quinlan manned my corner, and like I had Charlie Rader in my corner. It was a big mess. And Jimmy's been with Mass BJJ since day one, and he was like, why don't you come train here? And I hit things off with Nate, and things were a lot better. And I always look and think, man, I say to Nate often, I'm like, I wish I could do this all over again and have you behind me and have game plans and all this stuff. He goes, hey, but you know what? You can't trade it in because you got this huge opportunity. But yeah, my body was destroyed. An active release guy trying to open my hand up, I like fractured my thumb on the show, and you know, like I said, my body was completely destroyed. My muscle mass was completely gone. But at the end of the day, Crisco came with the game plan, and that was the biggest thing. And people would ask me, "Oh, what's your plan in this fight?" I said, "I'm going to punch him in the face." Lo and behold, that's not a good idea or a game plan.
Right. Right. Now, what's the one thing that you took away from the show? Was it that you need to start game planning? You need to do what the other guys are doing out there? You mentioned that he was watching film and he kind of knew everything that you were going to do before you did it. Was that the main thing you took away from it, or was there something else from the season that you took away and said, you know what, if I'm going to continue with this and compete at a high level, this needs to change, or I need to add this to my game?
Yeah, the number one thing with me and the number one thing on me was, you know, when everyone talked about me and my abilities, it was always, oh, Chuck's tough. You know, there wasn't one thing where they're like, oh, he's good at this. It's always been, Chuck's tough. And toughness isn't going to win fights, especially not anymore. The game's evolved so much now to this point where toughness only gets you so far. And I showed that, you know, toughness is only going to get you so far. And now I've actually put skill behind my toughness. And I feel I'm a completely different fighter that if, you know, I get an opportunity again, I'm going to be able to show that I'm a completely different fighter. And that my number one thing was to acquire skill and get a coach and understand that I don't know everything. You know, I need to listen to people more. And, you know, I'm just in a good place now where I have my head coach, Nate Ryan, and, you know, I have a lot of trust in him. And, you know, I kind of just take my career and I put it in his hands. And I feel like he's done a great job with me and helped bend me and mold me. And, you know, it helps me not only as a martial artist, but as a person in general. He's helped, you know, reform me. So I owe a lot to him. You know, he's a great guy and a great friend of mine.
Mm-hmm. Now, earlier you mentioned that you're hoping to take your talents to a big show real soon. Just curious, you fought in the past for Bellator. Way back before you were even on The Ultimate Fighter, you fought for them, and they're a completely different organization from the organization that you fought for. Obviously, they're bigger, and they have more financial backing, and they're on a bigger platform now because they're on Spike TV. Just curious, what happened with Bellator?
That was just a one-fight deal. That was way back then. They just came to do a Boston show, and they were trying to get some of the local talent. And it's funny, I've never actually seen that fight, and it was pretty crazy because there's a ton of blood in it. But, yeah, they just pulled me in for a one-fight deal. And I kind of heard from him after The Ultimate Fighter, but, you know, my coach had said to me he wanted me to take some time after the finale to try to work on things and actually, you know, put skill into my game. And we didn't want to take a fight right away, and they were highly offended that we didn't want to take the fight, so we haven't heard from Bellator since then, so but you know, that's fine. You know, there's so many other promotions out there that I can go to, and if they're not interested in me, that's completely fine with me.
Mm-hmm. So you would be open to it if Bellator came calling, or a World Series? It's not UFC or bust for you, or is it?
Yeah, no, like I've obviously talked with my manager, Brian Gillespie, a few times on this, and saying that, you know, I wouldn't mind trying to get into a promotion like World Series of Fighting, because, you know, you've only got so long in this career, and, you know, I don't want to fight just for the sake of fighting, like I said before. I want to fight the best and prove myself that I can compete with these guys, that I can beat these guys. And the World Series of Fighting has a huge talent pool at 170 pounds now, and, you know, that lead me back to the UFC, absolutely. You know, so I think that would be a great opportunity if I can get into the World Series of Fighting.
Mm-hmm. You usually fight 2 to 3 times a year. Is that a good number of fights in a year, and is that what you're hoping for this year?
Yeah, realistically, when this year started, I want to try to like stretch out 3 to 4 if I could, at least 3. As I said, my weight cuts are really big. You know, I don't want to kill myself again and put myself into a situation where I had to cut 4 or 5 times in a year. That would just be too much, I feel. But hey, you know, say I rattle off 3 wins this year, I get a call from the UFC and I have to fight a short notice basis, then hey, I'm going to make it work. On a big name promotion like that, you're just going to make it work because you want to take advantage of that opportunity. Mm-hmm. But other than that, you know, I want to try to limit myself to about 3 to 4 this year if I could squeeze it in time frame wise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Chuck, real quick before I let you go, do you have any sponsors you'd like to thank, and is there anything you'd like to say to the fans?
Yeah, no, absolutely. SmartPowers.com has been a huge sponsor for me, you know, not just with my supplementation, but a lot of other things like, you know, sending me down to IMG Academies down in Florida to really work on my strength and conditioning stuff. And overall, the owner, Mike McCandless, you know, he's just a great friend of mine, too. And, you know, he comes in my corners and he's at all my fights and stuff like that. So he's a great guy. He's helped me out with a lot of different things, and he's been behind me since I was on The Ultimate Fighter. So win or lose, he's always there for me. So definitely a big thank you to him. Also the Kinetics, and, you know, all my teammates, you know, through Mass BJJ, the guys down at Bishops, And, Tom Egan, I can't ask for a better team to be around me.
Chuck, thank you for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it. Good luck March 14th at CES MMA 22 against Roger Carroll.
Thank you for having me.